Hi guys, and a very warm welcome to the Glory Stories podcast. I'm Gareth Morgan, and it's great to have you along as always. Now, in today's episode of our mini-series to mark the club's 30th anniversary, we're catching up with someone whose voice has provided the soundtrack for so many of the club's major moments, good and bad. And that is Mr. ABC Sport here in WA himself, the one and only Clint Wheeldon. Now, Clint was kind enough to come over to Glory HQ. Coffees were bought out of my own pocket, I hasten to add, not the club's expense account. And we got into it. We ended up discussing everything from his first days covering the club as a reporter for Channel 10 to his favourite Glory moments, his favourite Glory players, and also his favourite Bernsteiner one-liners. We covered a lot of ground. I'm sure you'll find it very, very entertaining indeed. So here it is. It is episode 4 with a fantastic Clint Wheeldon. Hope you enjoy. Clint, off the bat, we've got to deal with a sensitive and confronting topic, because I know lots of people think that you're a dyed-in-the-wool West Aussie. That's a very understandable assumption.
Yes.
Because you've been here for so long and have become so synonymous with WA, but you're actually a Sydney-sider.
Well, not just a Sydney-sider. I was born in Canberra, moved with my parents, obviously, because you don't get a choice, when I was about 2 to Sydney. And then at 18, I spent 3 years in Bathurst. So I've certainly spent some time on the East Coast. But at 21, an opportunity came up. I was working at Channel 10. They had a program called Sports Tonight, and I was a casual there. And a position came up in the Perth newsroom to do sport full time. And I actually put myself forward to Channel 10 as being the perfect person to take that job here in Perth because of my football background, because the Perth Glory were about to come in. And I'd spent a lot of time following St George Budapest, and then when they unfortunately left the National Soccer League, then UTS Olympic, and then Sydney Olympic, then UTS Olympic, and afterwards the Olympic Sharks. But I spent a lot of time covering them and watching them, and I put forward that, look, I'm your perfect person. You've got people to cover AFL over there. I'm from the East Coast, so I can do football and I can do a bit of rugby league because the Reds were still in existence at the time. So I'm your person to come to Perth. And so therefore I actually have to thank, in many respects, the Perth Glory coming into the competition to actually get me across, because I think that might have sold it when they had to make a decision.
And this is the thing, you are a genuine football fan, a lifelong Everton supporter as well.
Yeah.
How did that begin?
Well, this is again one of those weird sort of things. My family are originally from Sheffield. This is a long, boring story, Gareth. My family is originally from Sheffield, around that area. And so when you're growing up, you've got to pick a team, and I picked Sheffield United originally because I thought Wednesday fans, I was like 9. Wednesday was a strange name for a football club. Sure. And then as I got more and more interested, there was a time when, if you remember, the championship was on pay television and you could watch Sheffield United, and then it flipped over and they finally got the premiership. And the year that changed, Howard Kendall went from being the manager of Sheffield United back to being the manager at Everton. Don Hutchison went from Sheffield United to Everton. Mitch Ward went from Sheffield United to Everton. And I had to pick a club to follow. I've been unable to watch the Premier League. And so therefore I followed Everton, and yeah, as Alan Ball says, once Everton has touched you, nothing will be the same. So I've been a massive Evertonian since. Still have a look at how the Blades are going, but yeah, when they do play each other, I find myself cheering for Everton. And it was like, this is a poor analogy, but it was like having a girlfriend and then finding the wife and the one that you want to love for the rest of your life.
I like the analogy, Clint. I like it. Very effective. Very effective. So, as you mentioned, you've sold yourself to Channel 10. You've given them a pitch. They've gone for it.
I know.
They've gone for it. So
more for them.
What was your first? Do you remember your first ever kind of contact? Your first assignment that brought you into direct contact with Glory?
Well, I rang the club and got in touch with Roger Lafore, who was the CEO at the time, and basically came out and introduced myself and said, look, I've actually got a background in football. I played football, and I've got this new job at Channel 10. I want to make sure that we give the Perth Glory as much coverage as we can. And he was terrific, really open to the idea about giving the Glory as much as they could. Gary Marocchi was the coach, and so I went down to a training session before game had been played. and introduced myself to Gary and a lot of the other players around the place. And I became pretty good friends with most of them. They were great fellas. Gary was great to deal with. Everyone at the club was really open. And so we would try and do as many stories as we possibly could on them. And it was an easy sell because there was a real buzz because they were entering the competition. There was real hype. And although they didn't win their first game, I still remember going to their first game. We did a live cross for Channel 10 during the game. The place, you could just feel that there was something there. Like Perth had been crying out for a team that it captured everyone's imagination. And I'd come from Sydney again, and I know that there are real pluses for the way that the different teams had been followed by different people of different ethnic backgrounds. That had kept football alive in this country. That was a real positive. But for football to grow, teams were needed that actually embraced everybody. And that's what the Glory suddenly did. And you could see just walking around. And again, I spent time following Olympic when I was at high school, but they were never my club because I went because I had lots of Greek friends. But they weren't my club. They were just the team I followed at the time. And you went to the Glory and you walked in, and I know that there was a big, obviously, expat English contingent, and they were really responsible for the chants and the feeling that they gave. But you would also walk past Greek people supporting the club, Italian people supporting the club, people, Polish people supporting the club. There were groups of Ukrainians I know that were supporting the club. And all of a sudden you suddenly felt, this is the way forward for football in this country. You could sense that it was going. And because that had happened, it was a real easy sell in those early days to go back to the news director and the sports director and go, oh, I've got a great story about the Glory here, or they're doing this. And there were real characters too. And I know there's always characters, but like Bobby Despotovsky was terrific. He was always happy to have a chat. You could roll up, you could literally ring Gary Marocchi at his firm in Northbridge/East Perth and say, Gary, can we come down and have a chat about the weekend's game? And he'd go, sure, no problems. And down you'd roll. These are the days before media managers, Gareth. The media managers have a great role to play, but it was a very different. You'd just pick the phone up and ring these guys and say, can we come out to your house and have a chat with them? And that's what we would do.
Well, I was actually going to ask you about the media landscape, because as well as yourself, see the West are covering the club. So Mel Moffat, I'm presuming, was in and around things as well. How different was the media landscape at that time compared to today, would you say?
There was certainly greater interest in the Glory in those days. And again, they were the new club. They were new and exciting. Mel Moffat and along with him, Jonathan Cook played an enormous role in supporting the club. And remember, it was only 2 or 3 years into the Glory starting, there was that wonderful lift-out Super Soccer, which was terrific. And the West, for all that they cop, still deserve a lot of credit for what they tried to do to push the club. There were people, David McGrath at Channel 9 was also a big supporter, and I remember we used to chat a lot about it. The ABC, there was a guy named Duncan Huntsdale came across, and he was a big supporter of Glory as well. This was a bit before Steve Nilkowski started at Channel 7, but 7 would slowly get on board as well as the time went by. But yeah, it was a good media group of people that liked the game and wanted the game to succeed. And we would do our absolute best to try and beat everybody to get a better story, but at the same time, everyone had the club's best interests at that time. So it was different because things weren't as commercial. The understanding about things like backdrops, for example, they weren't, because you weren't trying to sell your corporates. So therefore you could just roll up to people's places and ring them on the Sunday morning after a game. Hey, can we come out and have a chat? Yeah, sure, no worries.
We mentioned Gary Marocchi there, the club's first ever coach. Just with Glory coaches in general, you would have seen them at their best and at their worst.
Yeah.
Who did you sort of enjoy working with the most, if that's not an unfair question?
Oh, I thoroughly enjoyed working with Gary, and Bernd and Mish. I thought were all terrific. Gary was always happy to chat. He was always happy to tell the stories. He was always happy to be available to speak. Bernd and Mish, I found out this much afterwards, had made a decision when Bernd arrived and Mish was his assistant that they would basically never say no to an interview, which would make sense now I look back, because if I had nothing on, then you're looking for a story because you've got to, in TV terms, we call it filling the black. You've got 10 minutes if you're at Channel 10. You have to fill that 10 minutes. If we were looking for a story and we wanted a local one, you could roll down to Glory Training and go, Burnt, can we have a chat? And Burnt would come across and say something ridiculous. And you'd have a story straight away. That would be it. And often he would then get in trouble for saying something ridiculous. And then we'd go down the next day and he would explain why he fully believed what he said. Like, you know, he'd criticise another team's ground and then get in trouble for that. And then the next day say, I don't know why I'm in trouble. Their ground is no good. You know, the old famous one, this ground is only, this surface is only good for sheep and goats, which is, I think he was referring to one of our Melbourne rivals at the time. So they were all great because they sort of got what we were trying to do, which was like just sell the club. So they were always affable to talk. You could grab Mish, you could grab Burnt. As I said, you could grab Gary. I thought they were great in that they knew, and this is not just a Perth Glory issue, by the way, it's all clubs where coaches sometimes when it comes to their KPIs, they only think about wins and losses. And one of the KPIs I think every coach has is that they have to sell the football club as well as worry about wins and losses because we are so focused, because the coach is the most important person in a footballing sense. So people naturally want to know what the coach has to say. And so if you've got those guys who are happy to be available, it's a huge win. And I know it must be a pain in the butt trying to talk to the media all the time. I get that. But I think that is a KPI that coaches need to look more at.
I don't think Steve McMahon had that KPI, did he?
Steve McMahon was not a great result for Perth Glory. I can understand why there was an allure to get him, but he arrived here with an attitude of, I know more than everybody else. And that wasn't just the media, but there are so many great footballing people in this nation, in this state, who love this club, who just because you haven't come from England doesn't mean that you don't know the game, doesn't mean you don't respect the game, doesn't mean that you aren't passionate about the game. And Steve McMahon came with this attitude of, you guys have no clue what you're talking about, and treated good people with, I would argue, just disdain. And that did an enormous amount of damage. And for the media, it was easy. What would happen is if guys got sent, and this worried me less because I was used to dealing with the Mick Malthouses of this world from football, so it didn't worry me. But often what would happen is the less experienced journos would go down to Glory and get treated like garbage and then just go, well, we're not going to do this and we'll get another story out of Melbourne for the footy. He did enormous damage to the club. And the nepotism that came with his son, who we actually felt sorry for because he just wasn't up to the standard. Steve McMahon was a really poor choice at a club who, after having that long break, needed to sell themselves to the Perth community again, and you had someone who was, I just don't want to do anything apart from coach. Well, sorry, that's not how this job works.
As you mentioned, that break between the NSL finishing up and the A-League starting, I know it's probably hard to say. Why do you feel, looking through your journalist eyes, why do you feel Glory struggled to adjust to life in the A-League, particularly in those early years, having obviously finished the NSL on such a high with back-to-back titles, lots of expectation that more success would follow in the A-League era, and it didn't, certainly not in those early years. What did you put that down to?
It's a really good question, and it's something that a lot of people have argued and thought about for a long time. I don't think there's no silver bullet, as people would say. But I do think what happened is there was a loss of momentum because there was such a gap, and it was an enormous gap. And people started to look for other things to fill in their time and fill in their desire to watch live sport. That had an impact. I don't think that the Glory was given enough love from the national body because it was that, well, they've been successful. They're okay. They're over there. We're not going to give them the same level of support that they got. And again, there are all these new shiny clubs that we're going to promote. And you would remember here, I remember being particularly angry about this. When they had the big launch of the A-League and they had the big A-League promos, how much time was spent for the Glory? The Glory barely existed. It's like, hang on, they're the NSL champions here. They're the biggest club. This league only exists because of what Perth Glory has done. And whether it's because everybody's based on the East Coast, or there was a feeling of out of sight, out of mind, or it was like, well, they're so big, they'll look after themselves. Whatever happened, I don't think the Glory got the push that a lot of the East Coast, the new East Coast, or here's Sydney FC, how terrific. Here's Melbourne Victory, how terrific. I'm not saying don't promote them. That's really important for their markets. I think we got ignored. I don't think we got as much of a push as we deserved. And on top of that, I would argue in this case, that's when whoever was going to come in and take charge of the club needed to understand the importance of selling the football club. And you had someone who had no interest in talking to people beyond it. So a combination of all those factors didn't help the club. As for on-field, I think a lot of other decisions were made where all of a sudden these big people with lots of money were coming in and were prepared to throw money at getting marquee players in and throw money at strengthening their clubs. And the Glory at that time, those early stages, sort of rolled on with sort of what we knew. And those players were then obviously, in many respects, a year and a half, 2 years older. Other clubs had improved significantly. And so therefore we were sort of stuck in the middle. So I think it's a combination of off-field and on-field were the reasons why we didn't quite grasp the new, summer football, as it was called.
Exactly. Mate, I know when you're covering games, you're working, you're caught up in things, you're focused on calling things correctly and getting things right and remembering things and so on. But have there been some moments at Glory games when, even though you've been working and you've had that working mindset, you've actually had just a few seconds to sit back and think, do you know what, this is fantastic? Or equally, do you know what, this is a disaster?
Yeah. Let's talk the positive first.
Yeah, let's go down that
I know this is so long ago, but this is still one of the greatest sporting events, moments that I've ever been at. So
I think I know where we're going.
Well, I don't know. There's a couple of huge ones, but this was for me because we were there to do a story on the Glory Shed in the first season. So this is like, I don't know, halfway into the year, and the shed are up and about, and like, how good is this? And again, you're able to take your own cameras in those days. So we're in front of the shed, last few seconds against the Melbourne Knights. It's 2-2. The ball comes out, Scotty Miller chests it down and then lashes it from memory into the top right-hand corner. And I'm almost here to you away from where Scotty Miller comes across with Vinko Biliubasic to celebrate to the shed. Like, we're right here filming this moment. So we captured the moment, the roar from behind us, the roar from the stadium, and just to see that sheer absolute joy and jubilation on everyone's face. I'll never forget that. That was absolutely spectacular. One of the all-time great moments. So that's, 96, 97? Yeah, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Great moment. There's also been a couple other great moments. Finally getting through for the win after the 2 grand final losses. It's an interesting one. Like, I was a journalist rather than a broadcaster, so I was absolutely cheering for the story. And because I'm based in Perth, I'm cheering for the Perth Glory to win. So they were, thank God we finally won. That was such a relief. I was so pleased for Jamie Harnell and Damien Murray, who'd been through the other disappointments on the way through. They were great. And there's also been times the loss to Wollongong was just gutting. That 3-3 draw into penalties has just been one of the most depressing things that I've ever been at. It just ripped the heart out of everybody. That was so depressing. And there's also been games where, in recent times, not that recent times, but in recent sort of times, when we've just been played off the park and it's so depressing to go home and go, well, that was tough. But yeah. Also, I was at Sydney United for Kombutsianis' free kick, which was brilliantly described by 6PR's George Grilisic as up where only the spiders live. It was a cracker. So I've been lucky enough to be at all sorts of random moments throughout Glory history. But still Scotty Miller after all this time. What a goal that was.
What a goal. What a goal! Now you brought in some of your match day programs today as well, which was physical evidence of those away games that you just alluded to,
including the Northern Spirit. Remember them?
100%. I went to a Northern Spirit game myself. I think Ian Crook was playing.
Yeah,
with those,
yeah,
I remember. I get the feeling that, especially in those early days, some of those away games over East were quite lively in terms of some of the stuff that went on. And as a travelling fan, you may have been best advised to maybe just keep things under wraps a little bit. Would that be fair?
I remember being escorted out of Sydney United after a late equaliser. There's actually a hilarious vision of me. I must have been on holidays. Because there's a photo of me in the Glory Away kit, the one with the big white stripe down here, with a shocking goatee celebrating a goal. And there was probably about 15 of us at Denza Park, and the police actually escorted us out of the ground at the time. I remember being at Marconi as a journalist when we lost that game, and it was a final, and it was at Marconi, it was against Sydney United, and the Sydney United fans behind the goals were ripping out the seats as they do. Craig Dean got seriously hurt and there was no ambulance, which was just an indictment on the league at that time. And there were fireworks, all sorts of flares going off, and that was a moment when you were just like, what on earth is happening here? And I also remember travelling with the club. We were at Melbourne Knights. This was the year before the whole controversy with Bobby Despotovsky. We didn't go that one, but we went with the club, and we used to, again, the relationships were so strong that the club were good enough that they would literally give us a lift out. I've been on numerous buses back in the day. The club would give you a lift out there and give you a lift back, which was great. But getting abused by Melbourne Knights supporters, why aren't you here to support, why are you only covering the Glory? Why'd you only shoot them? What are you doing there? And it was just like, well, mate, we're from Perth. So with the greatest respect, you need to be asking your Melbourne guys why your Melbourne TV stations aren't out here. But yeah, just copping abuse, and people won't mind this because you're a journalist, so probably people say you should be spat on. But actually seeing blokes get spat on, walk back through, because we're filming the guys up the tunnel and looking up going, what on earth is happening here? Yeah. I've seen a fair bit of that along the way.
Wild stuff.
Amazing.
Wild stuff. Now, obviously, hearing you speak today, mate, it's clear how much passion that you have for the club, genuine supporter. And I know you're too good a journalist to let that cloud your vision at all. But is it a little bit difficult sometimes if you are calling a game or something along those lines, whether you're covering a game, calling a game, whatever it might be, to retain that impartiality when deep down I get the feeling that you're absolutely desperate for Glory to do well?
This is interesting. When I was a journalist, yes, because you are watching as a journalist, but also as a fan. When I'm calling, oddly no, because you're so focused on getting the player identification right. You're so focused on being able to make sure that you are correctly describing what's happening. You're so focused on things like making sure that you bring your expert in or you don't speak over your expert, or if you're sideline reporter who's normally in your ear, if you can throw to them at the right time, if you've kept an eye on what's happening off the ball, if you're keeping an eye on everything that's happening. Actually in the game, as ridiculous as it sounds, I actually don't find it hard to remain unbiased because you are just so focused on the game. But there have been numerous times when I've taken the headset off after we've wrapped up and I've punched the table in frustration if we've lost a goal, if we've lost to a late goal. You almost switch off. People won't believe it, but yeah, it's true. And I've called, what have I called? Nearly 900 games of AFL football, and I've called something like 100 games of association football and endless basketball games. And during the game, I'm absolutely focused on getting the call right. But after the game, you can either celebrate or quite often commiserate with what's happening.
Any of your summarisers or co-coms, of any of them perhaps got a little bit too involved?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've done games. Mish Davray was almost just an out and out fan in a couple of games. He was great, like terrific analysis, but absolutely would describe the glory as we. Stan Lazaridis was the same. I loved working with Stan. Stan was terrific, but would always, again, refer to the glory as we need to do this. And I'm conscious that we're broadcasting everywhere, so I can't say we. Occasionally you would have to remind Stan, we're broadcasting to Sydney or Melbourne, so their fans they don't want us to call up about we need to do this. I had a great time calling the Asian Cup with Colette McCallum, now Colette Gardner. And whenever she would talk about the Matildas, she would talk about we, which I get, I understand, because they've been in the engine room, like they've been right in the thick of it. So I know why they talk about we, but yeah, I try not to. But I know why they do. So yeah, all the time, which is good.
Absolutely, of course it is. Of course it is. It's what we all like. It's what everyone relates to. So, mate, as someone who's got such a deep knowledge of and passion for so many multiple sports, so you can have a chat to you literally about anything, and we often do, whether it's cricket or, obviously with the exception for me of AFL, because not for me that one, but if you could have played one sport professionally.
Oh, wow.
We're all frustrated professionals, let's be honest.
Well, to be honest with you.
And who would you have played for?
Well, I'm going to go left field here. If I could have played any sport professionally, it would be golf. Any sport professionally. Because that would also allow me to travel to so many places and watch other sports, and it would pay me enough that I would have the ability to go to pretty much any other sporting event that I would possibly want in the world. And also, the other thing about golf is it's all on me. It would all be my responsibility. So that is one thing I like. I like being the one in charge of stuff, and if there's a problem, then it's my fault. So you could never blame, why didn't the keeper come out to that? Or why didn't you tell me that I was supposed to be here? It'd be nobody else's fault. So golf, that's just mine. But yeah, I reckon professionally, if I could play it at a high enough level, it would be golf, because that would then give me the ability to do so many other things around that as well. And also you can play professionally into your masters, into your old age, which is one thing, as much as I would have loved to have played football professionally, like 35, 36, maybe 40 if you're, Richard Goff or someone, but for the most of us, yeah, there you go. You weren't expecting that answer, were you?
It's a very well thought out answer. I'm sitting here nodding, thinking, yeah, and you get to wear some nice leisure wear.
That's
as well,
exactly,
so that's
exactly right.
Also a plus. Now, I'm going to finish up, mate, with a very, very unfair question, which is, I'm just going to ask you straight out, your favourite Glory men's player of all time.
God,
I know.
that's hard.
All right, you can have three. Go on, just because I do feel that I've dropped this on you, and it is probably a little bit unfair. So you can have three.
Wow.
To be honest, you can have as many as you like, really.
There's so many,
try to
though.
stick to three.
There's so many. I'm going to be completely biased and go back to the early days, because that was when my love affair with the club first started. But then at the same time, Diego, goodness me, how could you leave him out? Oh, I know. Well, yeah, sorry. I didn't know him that well, so I'm going to... This is... You get votes for friendship here as well.
Of course you do.
Bobby Despotovsky. I loved watching Bobby play. And I do remember, I can't remember the name of the coach, but Hertha Berlin were here. Remember they were here to do with the training stuff. And I remember their coach at the time standing on the sideline, because obviously he knew Bert and we were just hanging around, actually saying that, he goes, if that number 10 was 4 to 5 years younger, I would sign him tomorrow. And I remember that really stood with me, that, yeah, what an incredible thing to say. And it sort of was that point about Bobby was exceptional, just an exceptional player in this league. And really, if that had been noticed earlier, could have gone on to anything. So yeah, I love Bobby. He was great. I really enjoyed watching Jason Petkovic in goal. Saved us so many times. Just enormous presence. Didn't say a lot, but just commanded that area. You always felt, even if somehow someone had got through, there was a one-on-one, you always felt that Jason was a chance of pulling off a save. And that's a great feeling to have as a supporter, and I reckon it'd be even better if you're a player. And then for the third spot on the podium, I love the skipper in Gareth Naven. I love Strutters early on. Oh, love watching Davey Morey. I'm going to go back to Scotty Miller, just because he's just such a cracking fella, and I just thoroughly enjoyed hanging out with him. I could name pretty much the whole starting 11 from the first 5 years, and You know, Danny Milosevic was a cracking bloke. I liked hanging out with him. Always enjoyed talking to Vinko. Yeah, there's so many great players. And again, I'm biased because of the guys I knew, so I tend to lean towards them as much as, you know, I do look down and go, yeah, I'm sorry, Diego, you were pretty bloody good.
He'll be devastated, Diego.
I'm sure he could care less. And what he would do is he would claim that he didn't speak enough English, so he didn't know what I said anyway.
That is true.
And you know that's true.
He would stroke his beard, enigmatically stroke his beard, yes. And then disappear like he used to do.
Oh, I didn't even mention Tags. I love watching Tags. What am I thinking? How did I not mention him? Sorry, Adam, you're a ripper as well.
There's going to be so many offended players, Clint.
I know.
So
it's such an unfair question.
We will wind it up there, mate. We could literally talk all day, and we quite often do when we have one of our lengthy phone calls, but really appreciate you coming in. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing those memories with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, mate.